Destiny of a Savior by Famous Fault. Chapter 17. Disappearing. Mokuba was not happy. Christmas Eve was a time of year he was used to spending alone, although the last couple of years he was always invited on dinner with the Schroders every Christmas Day. Not this year. He should have been satisfied. He went to Britain, found Raphael, and had a very long talk with him. It was, however, unfortunate that Raphael's answers had been anything but satisfactory. Mokuba had told him everything that could be of importance, and Raphael had listened with sincere interest. So had Joe. When Mokuba had asked about Joe, Raphael had told him the truth, trusting Mokuba to keep quiet, which he would. That story, if anything, was harder to believe than the lies Raphael had told social services. Atem had saved him from death, and since he was in too tight a position himself, he had asked Raphael to take care of him. Yes, Mokuba had learned a lot. Atem was still around, something Mokuba had feared, as it meant the turbulence wasn't over. Rio was quite possibly dead. A thought that made the cold grip around Mokuba's heart tighten, and Yugi was God's knew where in grave danger. He got confirmed that the apparition he had experienced had not been the only one, that in fact the influence of the beasts from the Dominion and the Shadows were becoming something of a problem. Mokuba also learned about Rebecca's death and the true cause of it. Mokuba learned more than he had ever imagined possible. Wizards, witches, shadows, and souls all entered Mokuba's consciousness. It was, however, the last part of the conversation that had left Mokuba thoroughly unsatisfied. "So what do I do now?" he had asked. "What did she tell you?" Raphael had asked in his turn. "That I do was needed and that she'd lead the way." "Where was she leading?" Raphael had asked, continuing. "Nowhere! Nothing has happened since then!" Mokuba called out frustrated. "There must be something I can do!" "Yes," Raphael had said. "You wait." "Wait!" "No matter how much we dislike the things they tell us to do, we can better do them. And all you can do now is to wait," Raphael had said, and looked at Mokuba with an expression that urged him to understand and accept. So Mokuba waited. Christmas Eve, and still Mokuba waited for something to happen. He did not know what he was waiting for, nor what would happen when he was done waiting. The only thing he knew was that he waited. The girl with the blue eyes white dragon had told him she'd lead the way, so he waited. The further away they got from Azkaban, the more responsive Arrow became. Yugi smiled wryly when he thought about how much he had to explain to the guard once he woke up. He would not really enjoy it, though, at the other hand, there was a large chance Arrow already knew most of it. Arrow tended to know what was going on. The boat steered them back towards the Ministry, and for Yugi, that was a problem. Entering the bowels of the Ministry of Magic stood equal to suicide. Somehow, they had to redirect the boat elsewhere. He just didn't know how. When Arrow finally came to, they were closer to the Ministry than to Azkaban, and Yugi had still been unable to find Atem. The man with the long black hair moaned before sitting up and brought a hand to his head. "What the hell happened?" he asked, his eyes unfocused. "We left Azkaban," Yugi said, ready to aid the man if it turned out to be necessary. "Not true. I'm not allowed to leave Azkaban," Arrow said groggily. But his eyes shot up, indicating that Yugi's words had managed to get him fully awake. He looked around him, and when he saw nothing else but the wide open sea, the expression on his face changed. It was quite hard to describe. It was an odd mixture between confusion, delight, and fear. It was quite a contrast to Arrow's usually composed self. What are you doing here?" he asked at last. "Janice told me to get out, since I only would be in the way, and since you would be too. I was to take you with me," Yugi said, not really giving Arrow anything to go on. Once again, he tried to find Atem, but the door to his darker soul was tight shut. "How did you—" Then Arrow sighed. "Never mind. He's free, isn't he?" Yugi nodded. "Yes, he is. Does he have a name?" Arrow shook his head. "Not as far as anyone knows. We've never bothered calling him anything different from that madman. We were content with that. You feel a bit odd. He attacked you, right?" "It's a bit fuzzy in my mind. He has that effect on me." Arrow sounded highly bitter when he said those words, and Yugi assumed he simply disliked feeling defenseless. Yugi nodded. "The other me was hit by the killing curse. He's not gone, though. You said so." Arrow frowned, then nodded. "Yes, I can still feel his presence. I do not remember saying that, though." That bothered the man. Then he smiled. It was a pleasant smile meant to hide bitterness. "Doesn't your spirit have a name? I know that you are Yugimoto,
but none of us could find any information on your spirit, other than what the Daily Prophet wrote.
Atem, Yugi answered. His name is Atem. It took a lot of time and effort before we could find his name, but we found it. Once again, Yugi tried to find his darker, but in vain. Are you certain he's going to be okay?
Positive, Arrow said. The bond you two share is remarkable. I've never felt something quite as strong. When I looked beyond the mortifying fear he induces, I saw the bond you two shared. I might say is the most unique thing I have ever experienced.
You are very insightful, Yugi remarked. A gift? Arrow nodded.
Yes. It is hard to explain. It is not quite like Legilimens, even though people thought so when they sent me to Azkaban. I see a lot more than a Legilimist, but at the same time I see less. I always know if there's a person in the room. It's like dots of light that I can see, even with my eyes closed, and the color tells me how that person feels. Of course, it is less substantial than that. I can also tell what kind of relation people have to each other, or if that person is affected by something, via spells or potions. It's highly complicated, and not always equally pleasant, since it physically affects me.
So that is why you passed out cold when he escaped? Yugi asked.
Arrow nodded. Yes, the feeling he spreads around himself is painful, very painful. Usually I can deal with people with strong emotions, but there is something very special about him. I can't comprehend the way he feels, and I pass out. His tone was exceedingly angry. I should stay and help the others.
But we are liabilities, Yugi added, who understood what Arrow meant.
Exactly, Arrow said. I am surprised. I can't tell. You dislike this as much as I do.
I freed him. It should be my responsibility to take care of him. I've been told how dangerous he is. I experienced it firsthand, but they just sent me away. I didn't want to go. I wanted to help. Of course, I was just powerless, but still, Yugi sighed. The waves had started to calm down, and in the distance he could see the cave that led to the Ministry of Magic. If you were caught by the Ministry of Magic, what will happen to you?
Arrow shrugged. I don't know. We never have contact with the Ministry of Magic. It's only because of the sudden change of prisoners that we know something has happened.
You know who Voldemort is? Yugi asked, and received a grim nod from Arrow. The Ministry is his now.
Arrow shook his head. That's bad. People must live in terror.
I take it they do, Yugi said. I've been on the run for quite a while. I hardly came in contact with people, and I have spent some time in Azkaban. I don't really know what things are like, but the last thing I saw of the wizarding world was sorrow and bitterness. Arrow opened his mouth to reply, but not a word passed his lips. Suddenly he surged forward and pulled Yugi down, then he pressed down, keeping them both against the bottom of the boat. Yugi started to protest loudly when a complete amount of 4 killing curses shot over their heads.
Did we hit them?
A male voice asked, and Yugi went quiet at once. You, go check! A female voice said, and chills went down Yugi's back. He had only heard that voice once, and that had been in the Ministry of Magic. The voice belonged to Bellatrix Lestrange. Yugi laid as still as he could, even holding his breath as one of them approached the boat. It was beyond him how they could stand on the water, but he did not like it, especially since they couldn't hear anyone approaching. He looked at Arrow, who had a very concentrated look in his eyes. Whatever he was doing, he hoped that it was something clever. They needed it. Then Arrow opened his eyes and caught Yugi's glance. He held up 4 fingers to indicate the number of Death Eaters present. Then he held 1 finger over his lips and motioned for Yugi to stay down. Yugi simply nodded. Arrow conjured his wand silently and waited. Yugi felt more than saw or heard the Death Eater lean in over the edge of the boat.
Imperio,
he heard Arrow whisper, and he almost jumped up out of surprise. Only a primal survival instinct kept him from doing so. Right there in front of him, Arrow had just used an unforgivable curse.
The dead,
the man who checked said loudly. Bellatrix squealed in delight, a bone-chilling sound that made Yugi shiver. He really wished he could reach Atem, but as much as he tried, the spirit was still too affected by the killing curse to be aware of anything whatsoever. It was the zooming sound that told Yugi that the 4 Death Eaters were on brooms. He also heard that those zooming sounds were now hovering above them, having stopped their zooming. Bellatrix laughed some more. Yugi, the Dark Lord will be pleased. The other one we can leave on the bottom of the sea. Yugi felt 2 hands lift him, and he had to consciously make an effort to not show a sign of life when he was hung over a broom in a highly uncomfortable way. Bellatrix shouted, and the boat erupted into flames. Yugi couldn't help but clench his fist and hope nobody noticed. He couldn't do anything but to help Arrow. He knew for a fact that Arrow, nor any of the other guards, could apparate, since they were sent to Azkaban before they turned old enough to learn it. Arrow would burn to death, and Yugi was powerless without a dem. Then they flew off. Yugi felt the cold wind play with his hair and clothes, the salty smell of the sea in his nose, and the salty taste of tears. At least they had not removed his puzzle. He wished from the depth of his heart that the vessel of Atem's soul was less conspicuous. Sooner or later they would remove it, and then he'd even be separated from the spirit he held so dear. They were on their way for quite some time before the smell in the air changed from salty sea to that of trees, accompanied by the sharp feeling in his ears and nose that could only be produced by a winter's day. The brooms were discarded, and Yugi could breathe again. The pressure of the broom on his stomach would result in one very long bruise across his torso. He just hoped nobody noticed that he was breathing. "Raoul!" Bellatrix said. "You take Moto with you! We are going to the Malfoy mansion! No mistakes!" Raoul lifted him and threw Yugi over his shoulder. Yugi cursed in his head. Breathing without it being noticed now would be one hell of a challenge.
He's dead. What could go wrong?
Bellatrix hissed and dashed forward, pressing her wand against Raoul's cheeks. "There is no guarantee both of them are dead. This man is more dangerous than butter. He may not be able to defeat the Dark Lord, but he's dangerous. Nonetheless, no mistakes. Now go!" Yugi could feel Raoul gulp in fear and then several clacks as the Death Eaters disapparated one by one. Yugi had never operated before other than with Dobby, and the experience was very different and horrible, especially in his upside-down position. It was the natural yearning to survive that made that he did not throw up when it came to an end. He preferred Portkey, he realized, although his experience with those was limited. They landed outside a large gate, and with Bellatrix taking the front, they went through it, and at quick pace they walked up to the front door of the large mansion. Raoul didn't exactly carry him carefully, and it was quite a bumpy walk for Yugi. He was grateful, though. It meant he could breathe without being discovered. He did, however, realize that he was in a very, very tight position. The chance he'd get out of this alive was remarkably small. It was a matter of minutes before they would realize that he was not dead. It was also only a matter of minutes before they would take his puzzle. The Death Eaters were walking single file, and Yugi could see the feet of the man that walked behind Raoul. He'd have to wait for a better opportunity to prevent them from taking his puzzle. The Death Eaters entered through the front doors and were welcomed by a woman who looked severely worn out but did her best to keep her head high. Narcissa Malfoy. Bellatrix did not even look at her, but simply walked past Narcissa and into a room which was nearly empty. There were a few armchairs assembled in a ring around a low, round coffee table and a hearth with no fire. On the wooden floor lay a large green carpet, and there were 2 large windows in the western wall. But that was all. Raoul tossed Yugi on the floor, the carpet breaking his fall. A different Death Eater kept guard over him, pointing at him with his wand, just in case. Lucius Malfoy entered the room and stopped in his tracks when he saw the figure on the floor. Had Yugi's eyes been open, he would have been able to see the expression of horror that fluttered over Lucius's face.
"Why did you bring him here?"
he asked, and although Yugi was not able to see Lucius' fear, he could hear it. For a moment a pleasant feeling of malice went through him, then it died. They had already tried to kill Lucius Malfoy, already tried to glow in the killer's fears, and it had not been the vengeance he had hoped for. He could find no pleasure in Lucius's fear. "Frightened, Lucius?" Bellatrix asked in a mock voice. Then her tone became more serious, less childlike. "Don't worry, he's dead."
"I thought that very same thing when I tried to kill him in that tomb."
Lucius bit back, his fear still in his voice.
"He's hard to kill."
Yugi did not need to see to know that Lucius was holding his wand in his hand, ready to strike at once. "Oh, boo-hoo!" Bellatrix mocked. "Then perhaps this will assure you." Yugi did not know how he knew it, but for some reason he knew exactly what Bellatrix was going to do. Perhaps it was a sixth sense that kicked into action during this moment of mortal danger, or perhaps it was because of the 4 years of training while sneaking through alleys and abandoned buildings. Nonetheless, it saved his life. He jumped up and out of the way just before Bellatrix's green spell hit the spot where he had been lying just a second earlier.
Bellatrix screamed in frustration when she saw that the man she had believed to be dead wasn't. You told me he was dead! Lucius called out angrily and did his best to stun the fleeing figure. Yugi did not bother listening to the shouted argument that followed. He kept running for the closest exit, the same door he had entered through. While doing so, he removed the Millennium Puzzle from around his neck and put it into the small red pouch, praying nobody had seen him do it. He didn't run in a straight line, too afraid of being hit, and ran in a sort of zigzag pattern that probably saved his life more than once. Sometimes he could not help but look behind him. Once he ducked to avoid a spell and used the opportunity to slip his pouch into his shoe. It wasn't comfortable, but it was the best he got. Then the doors in front of him opened before he could reach them, and in entered two Death Eaters, followed by none other than Voldemort himself. Yugi stopped dead in his tracks, just a few centimeters from running into the Dark Lord himself. One had to say it was quite an accomplishment. He took some staggering steps backwards, looking around himself wildly in hope of finding a different escape. There was none. Young man, you just succeeded in making my day a little less unbearable, a high voice said, yet again a voice Yugi had only heard once before, but which he would never forget. He raised his wand, and for the second time that day, Yugi was submitted to torture, unlike anything he had felt before. It didn't, however, not last long. It seemed that the only reason he was being tortured was to relieve some frustration. Still, it was not very pleasant. When Voldemort grew tired of hearing Yugi scream, the Japanese sat up and looked Voldemort in the eyes, his hatred unconcealed. You are bold to meet my gaze, the high, cold voice said, and Voldemort took a few steps towards Yugi. Yugi did not budge. There is not a person in this world, alive or dead, whose gaze I can't meet. He spat and received a slap from Bellatrix. It did not really bother him, although he was quite sure that he had a handprint on his cheek. It is amusing, Voldemort said, speaking slowly, and bent down so that he was almost at the same height as the sitting Yugi. Harry Potter is a symbol of hope, the power of innocence, and an endless source of inspiration for those who choose to keep resisting me. You, at the other hand... He reached out a pale hand and used it to brush Yugi's bangs away. Yugi shuddered. You are different. People fear you. You are far more dangerous than Potter, yet you don't inspire anyone. I like it. No endless talk of love. No people to shield you from harm. Nothing. Just you. Immensely powerful, dark, and completely alone. There is nothing innocent about you, neither do you pretend it is so. I could almost say that I respect you. Every Death Eater present gasped, too surprised to keep the facade even in front of their lord. The Dark Lord respected no one. He was superior to all. The Dark Lord took no notice. Of course, that doesn't not mean you don't act me. You are a muggle, powerful, but a muggle just the same, and you have thwarted my plans, destroyed my society. You freed the muggle bones in Azkaban. You interfered when I possessed water, and your friend was wreaking havoc at Hogwarts. Yugi bit. What? He turned ghostly pale at the dark wizard's words. Certainly it couldn't mean. Could it? His tone was unmistakable. The Death Eater started to laugh, and even Voldemort grinned. Yes. Your friend met an unfortunate end while fleeing for his life. It was remarkably slow. Tears sprung to Yugi's eyes. He neither tried to hide them nor wipe them away. It was not as if he could have fooled anyone present pretending it did not affect him. It did, greatly so. He shook his head, his vision obscured by the salty liquid. How much you remind me of a child, denying the things he does not like to hear. Your friend died, screaming, begging for death. He met his horrible end because you dragged him into this. You do realize that this is all your fault? For about 5 seconds, Yugi wanted to agree, to caught up in grief, to think clearly. Then, not knowing where he found the courage, or the stupidity, he looked Voldemort in the eyes and said, No! All this is your fault! You are the one destroying the things we love, the things we cherish and live for! If Rio is dead, then you killed him! Trust me when I say that you will meet your end very soon! The Death Eaters hissed in anger at the threat, and Voldemort looked almost
embarrassed. But the expression did not last very long. Once again he raised his wand and said with a cold voice, "Kosya!" Yugi screamed. True agony wrecked his body as he once again was submitted to a pain unlike any other. He knew it was pointless, he really did, but he tried to fend the pain off somehow, anyhow. He wondered how long he would be able to take this before he succumbed. It did not feel like much longer.
"I'm sorry,"
he heard in the back of his consciousness. For a split second the pain disappeared. Had he really just heard a Tem? He doubted he had, because when he racked his mind to find his partner, he could not find him. The spirit was still far too weak to be sensed when the puzzle wasn't around Yugi's neck, let alone to have said something. Yugi had really made Voldemort angry. He was tortured not a few seconds like the previous times, but minutes. His throat went dry from screaming, and when he did scream, it felt as if someone was rubbing sandpaper against the inside of his throat. He was just grateful for the carpet that prevented him from getting any more bruises. Not that those, in compare, small discomforts mattered when perhaps the most cruel of the 3 unforgivable curses wrecked his body. It felt like ages, but eventually it stopped. He was barely conscious and he had to struggle for breath, but the pain had stopped. He moaned and fought back the urge to throw up. He noticed vaguely that his hands were bleeding from when he had dug his nails into his palms trying to fend off the pain. He had only succeeded in creating more. "If I meet my end very soon, you will not be around to see it," Voldemort said, looking down on Yugi with a disgusted expression on his face. "But for the time being, I want you alive." Then Voldemort turned away, and Yugi found himself dragged to his feet with a wand against his rib cage. "Move, and I'll make you scream," Bellatrix whispered in his ear, followed by a mad giggle. "Play with him as you like, Bellatrix," Voldemort says dismissively. "Just keep him alive. I still have business with him. Keep him weak. His spirit will kill you all if he regains power. For the time being, I have different matters to attend to." Then Voldemort turned and looked Yugi in the eyes. "Merry Christmas, Muto," he said, and was gone. Yugi finally passed out. 3 months later, in March, Ron finally was able to turn into Potterwatch, the radio station he had told Harry and Hermione so much about. "Apologize for our temporary absence from the airwaves, which was due to a number of house calls in our area by those charming Death Eaters," came a familiar voice through the speakers of the radio. "But that's Lee Jordan!" Hermione said, astonished. "Oh no!" Ron beamed. "Go, eh?" "Now found ourselves another secure location," Lee was saying, "and I'm pleased to tell you that 2 of our regular contributors have joined me here this evening. Evening, boys!" "Hi." "Evening, River." "River, that's Lee," Ron explains. "They've all got code names, but you can usually tell." "Shh," Hermione said. "But before we hear from Royal and Romulus," Lee went on, "let's take a moment to report those deaths that the Wizarding Wireless Network News and Daily Prophet don't think important enough to mention. It is with great regret that we inform our listeners of the murders of Ted Tonks and Dirk Creswell. A goblin by the name of Gornook was also killed. Tracy Davis!" Hermione, Harry, and Ron all exchanged alarmed expressions. How much bad news would they receive in one and the same minute? That Ted Tonks was dead already made him feel sick. Would he really have to hear the names of people he knew? "Was found injured, but we can with relief say that she has been taken care of by a Muggle family that found her and is currently recovering." Hermione, Harry, and Ron let out a sigh of relief. "But I thought she was with Dean," Hermione said. Harry nodded. He had thought the same thing. Apparently not. "It is believed that Muggle-born Dean Thomas and a second goblin, both believed to have been traveling with Tonks, Creswell, and Gornook, may have escaped. If Dean is listening, or if anyone has any knowledge of his whereabouts, his parents, sisters, and girlfriend are desperate for news." Nobody commented, but Harry vaguely noticed that he was shivering, not from cold, but from the sudden wave of information that hit him. Tracy, Dean, Tonks. And what about everyone else? Meanwhile, in Gadley, a Muggle family of 5 has been found dead in their home. Muggle authorities are attributing the deaths to a gas leak, but members of the Order of the Phoenix inform me that it was the killing curse. More evidence, as if it was needed, of the fact that Muggle slaughter is becoming little more than a recreational sport under the new regime.
We regret to inform our listeners that the remains of Bathilda Bagshot have been discovered in Godric's Hollow. The evidence is that she died several months ago. The Order of the Phoenix informs us that her body showed unmistakable signs of injuries inflicted by dark magic. Then River, or more commonly known as Lee, invited them all for a minute of silence in memory of all those that had died. Silence fell. "Thank you," Lee said a minute later. "And now we return to regular contributor, Royal, for an update on how the new wizarding order is affecting the Muggle world." "Thanks, River," an unmistakable voice said, deep, measured, reassuring. "Kingsley!" Ron burst out. "We know!" Hermione said, hushing him. "Muggles remain ignorant of the source of their suffering, as they continue to sustain heavy casualties," Kingsley said. "However, we continue to hear truly inspirational stories of wizards and witches risking their own safety to protect Muggle friends and neighbours, often without the Muggles' knowledge. I'd like to appeal to all our listeners to emulate their example, perhaps by casting a protective charm over any Muggle dwellings in your street. Many lives could be saved if such simple measures are taken." "And what would you say, Royal, to those listeners who reply that in these dangerous times it should be wizards first?" Lee asked. "I'd say that it's one short step from wizards first, to purebloods first, and then to Death Eaters," Kingsley replied. "We're all human, aren't we? Every human life is worth the same, and worth saving." "Excellently put, Royal, and you've got my vote for Minister of Magic if we ever get out of this mess," said Lee. "And now, over to Romulus for our popular feature, Pals of Potter." "Thanks, River," another very familiar voice said. Ron started to speak, but Hermione foresaw them in a whisper. "We know it's Lupin!" "Romulus, do you maintain, as you have every time you've appeared on our program, that Harry Potter is still alive?" "I do," Lupin said firmly. "There is no doubt at all in my mind that his death would be proclaimed as widely as possible by the Death Eaters if it had happened, because it would strike a deadly blow at the morale of those resisting the new regime. The boy who lived remains a symbol of everything for which we are fighting. The triumph of good, the power of innocence, the need to keep resisting." A mixture of gratitude and shame welled up in Harry. Had Lupin forgiven him, then, for the terrible things he had said when they had last met? "And what would you say to Harry if you knew he was listening, Romulus?" "I'd tell him we're all with him in spirit," said Lupin, then hesitated slightly. "And I'd tell him to follow his instincts, which are good, and nearly always right." Harry looked at Hermione, whose eyes were full of tears. "Nearly always right," she repeated. "Oh, didn't I tell you?" Ron asked, surprised. "Bill told me Lupin's living with Tonks again, and apparently she's getting pretty big too." "And our usual update on those friends of Harry Potter's who are suffering for their allegiance?" Lee was saying. "Well, as regular listeners will know, several of the more outspoken supporters of Harry Potter have now been imprisoned, including Xenophilius Lovegood, erstwhile editor of The Quibbler." Lupin said. "At least he's still alive," Ron muttered. "We have also heard within the last few hours that Rubius Hagrid," all three of them gasped, and some nearly missed the rest of the sentence, "well-known gamekeeper at Hogwarts School, has narrowly escaped arrest within the grounds of Hogwarts, where he is rumoured to have hosted a Support Harry Potter party in his house. However, Hagrid was not taken into custody and is, we believe, on the run." "I suppose it helps when escaping from Death Eaters if you got a 16-foot-high half-brother?" Lee asked. "It won't tend to give you an edge," Lupin agreed gravely. "May I just add that while we here at Potter Watch applaud Hagrid's spirit, we would urge even the most devoted of Harry's supporters against following Hagrid's lead. Support Harry Potter parties are on rise in the present climate." "Indeed they are, Romulus," Lee said. "So we suggest that you continue to show your devotion to the man with the lightning scar by listening to Potter Watch. And now, let's move to news concerning the wizard who is proving just as elusive as Harry Potter. We like to refer to him as the Chief Death Eater, and here to give his views on some of the more insane rumors circulating about him, I'd like to introduce a new correspondent. Rodent? Rodent! Yet another familiar voice said, and Harry, Ron, and Hermione called out, "Fred! No, isn't George? It's Fred, I think," Ron said, leaning in closer, at whichever twin it was, said, "I'm not being Rodent. No way. I told you I wanted to be Rapier." "All right then, Rapier. Could you please give us your take on the various stories we've been hearing about the Chief Death Eater?" "Yes, River, I can," Fred said. "As
As our new listeners will know, unless they've taken refuge at the bottom of a garden pond or somewhere similar, You-Know-Who's strategy of remaining in the shadows is creating a nice little climate of panic. Mind you, if all the alleged sightings of him are genuine, we must have a good 19 You-Know-Who's running around the place.
Which suits him, of course. Kingsley said, the art of mystery is creating more terror than actually showing himself.
Agreed, Fred said. So, people, let's try and calm down a bit. Things are bad enough without inventing stuff as well. For instance, this new idea that You-Know-Who can kill people with a single glance from his eyes. That's a basilisk, listeners. One simple test. Check whether the thing that's glaring at you has got legs. If it has, it's safe to look into its eyes. Although, if it really is You-Know-Who, that's still likely to be the last thing you ever do. For the first time in weeks and weeks, Harry was laughing. He could feel the weight of tension leaving him. On the rumors that he keeps being sighted abroad? Lee asked. Well, who wouldn't want a nice little holiday after all the hard work he's been putting in? Fred asked. Point is, people, don't get lulled into a false sense of security thinking he's out of the country. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't, but the fact remains he can move faster than Severus Snape confronted with shampoo when he wants to. So don't count on him being a long way away if you're planning to take any risks. I never thought I'd hear myself say it, but safety first. Thank you very much for those wise words, Rapier, Lee said and sighed. Now, for a rather unusual twist to this program, we have a special visitor that goes under the name Bo. He was, dear listeners, until Christmas Eve, a guard at Azkaban prison. Harry inhaled sharply at those words.
I didn't know Azkaban had human guards.
He called out shocked. Ron looked equally perplexed, but Hermione just sighed. Do you really think Dementors can run a prison? Her words were logical, yet Harry was completely baffled by that new discovery. Tell me, Bo, is it true that Azkaban is out of use? Lee asked, and now even Hermione looked stunned.
Yes, River. Azkaban has been out of use for 3 months now. A very gifted prisoner escaped. He now creates havoc on Azkaban. It is believed all other guards and Undersecretary and head of the Muggle-born Registration Commission, Dolores Jane Umbridge, died at the hands of that prisoner. He is trapped on Azkaban, but he effectively puts the prison out of use.
Ron couldn't help himself. He cheered. It was absolutely inappropriate, but he cheered, and neither Hermione nor Harry could blame him. The death of Umbridge was something that made them all happy, even though it was the death of a human being.
How many other guards were there? Lee asked. Most people will be surprised to learn that Azkaban has human guards. Can you explain?
Yes, Bo said, and explained why the guards were there. Harry, Ron, and even Hermione gasped at the little radio as Bo explained how he and his colleagues had become guards of Azkaban, found guilty of crimes they could not help committing, and now they were all dead. All except for Bo. But as I understand it, were there no prisoners when he escaped? What happened to them? Lee asked, asking the same question Hermione had been chewing on. Did they get killed too?
No, Bo answered, to the trio's great relief. In fact, when that prisoner escaped, there were no other prisoners left on the island. They had all been freed.
What?
Harry, Hermione, and Ron called out as one, though they went quiet immediately to hear the answer. Lee was equally surprised as the trio, but he managed to bring it a tad more professional. All prisoners have for quite a while now been locked away in the Ministry of Magic, since more and more prisoners were escaping Azkaban. I can't claim that we did anything to help them, but we did not stop them either. A general dislike for the Ministry has been present among the guards of Azkaban since this system started a long time ago, though it has risen to immense proportions since You-Know-Who took over the Ministry. Guarding Death Eaters is one thing. Locking away children because of their heritage is simply repulsing. The very emotion the man described was in his voice. We cannot help the prisoners escape. We did different things to help them. But would we have done that, we would have been replaced with guards that do obey the new regime's every whim. We did not want to risk that. However, when an outsider started to free the prisoners, we did not attempt to catch him. In a few months, he had freed every prisoner there was in Azkaban. We knew he was there. I could sense him, but we all ignored him. By mistake, he freed that one prisoner he shouldn't have.
Who was it? Lee asked.
Do we know the person that freed all the prisoners? I take it many of your listeners has heard of him. Knowing him, I'm not sure of, but it is not an unknown name. We, as a matter of fact, had a small conversation to ensure he was no danger to us, and to ensure we were no danger to him. The very first thing he said was that he was there to save the students of Hogwarts. His name was Yugi Moto.
All three of them, and highly likely everyone who had been listening, dropped their jaws. The three of them looked at each other. The notorious history teacher had more or less disappeared from the face of the earth after Dumbledore's funeral. So that was where he had been. He had been freeing the Muggleborns in Azkaban. Lee was unable to keep his surprise from his voice, no matter how professional he tried to sound. Well, I am sure this news will surprise most of our listeners. Can you tell us why he was not captured by Dementors? Surely they would have tried to stop an intruder.
It is fairly simple, River,
Bo said, and one could almost hear the bitter smile in his voice.
The Dementors fear him. The spirit that possesses Yugimoto is so dark that the Dementors flee when they sense him. It is also the reason he and I escaped Azkaban after that gifted prisoner escaped. It is not an ungrounded fear, but also unnecessary for us. He has taken a clear stand against you-know-who and his followers, and seems hell-bent on protecting the Hogwarts students.
I must say that, for me, that does not come like a full surprise. Romulus, you have claimed before that the Daily Prophet has not been fair concerning Yugimoto. Do you have any comments on this? Yugi asked, involving Remus in the conversation. They have been talking about him? Hermione asked Ron, who had failed to mention that earlier.
Ron nodded.
Yes, Remus has been telling the people who listen to Boulder Watch Professor Muto's involvement at the Ministry of Magic. It is said that he is on our side, but this is the first real news any of us has heard about him since he was seen at Dumbledore's funeral.
I certainly do, River,
Remus said. I have said before that Yugimoto and his spirit saved many lives 2 years ago, although the Prophet did not even mention their presence there, or even that Muto had freed his spirit. He did, however, lose a friend there, and left the Wizarding World. By now this much is known. When they returned last July, the reaction of the general Wizarding population was disgust or fear. Now, seemingly from out of nowhere, they show up at Azkaban and free the prisoners. This event once again shows that we let our prejudice get the better of ourselves. Again and again, they have shown us that they care for the students they taught, and for people in general, risking their own lives to save that of those who have fallen victim to the new regime. I doubt anyone else would have been able to pull it off. Isn't that right, Bo? Lee asked, showing how skilled he was with the mic.
Indeed, Bo confirmed. The Dementors would have stolen the soul of anyone else who would have tried it. The fear they indulge is one of their major strengths.
I think I could agree, was all he said. Then, after a couple of seconds' silence, he continued. It is comforting to know that such a powerful person, although feared by us, really is looking out for us. It is unfathomable that someone actually broke into Azkaban to free the prisoners. A silence followed, and Harry did not need to hear the words that came to know something was wrong. Looking at his two friends, he saw that they had realized that very same thing. Then Bo spoke.
I'm sorry, River, Romulus. We did not know about the tabooed name. We were attacked by Death Eaters at open sea. The only reason I survived was because they thought I was dead. They took Muto with them. He has not been seen since. He might not even be alive anymore.
Hermione gasped for breath. Why is everyone dying?
It has not been confirmed yet, Ron protested. He might still be alive.
And what about his pale friend, the albino Ryobakura? Has anyone seen anything from him? He wreaked quite some havoc at Hogwarts for a while, all the time disturbing the Kara's plans. When was the last time he was seen, Rapier?
It's been a very long time, River. Nobody knows. He's not been seen since last Christmas. Nobody really knows what happened to him.
The only thing I can say, Lee said, is that I want to ask for a minute of silence once again, for all who have died or live in other terrible situations. Across the country, people fell silent, and next to Harry, Hermione sobbed quietly.